A single wrong answer meant a grisly death on the road to Thebes. The city was held hostage not by an army, but by a single, impossible creature, the Theban Sphinx, a monster whose very existence was a punishment from the gods. By the end of this journey, you will understand how solving its legendary riddle did not bring salvation, but instead unleashed one of mythology's most devastating and ironic tragedies. We will uncover where this beast came from, why its simple question was so lethal, and how the hero who defeated it was, in fact, weaving his own doom with every step. This is a story about the cruel mechanics of fate, where brilliant success leads directly to catastrophic failure. What does it truly mean to solve a riddle about mankind while completely failing to understand yourself? Thebes was once a proud and prosperous city, a jewel of ancient Greece, but beneath its gleaming walls and bustling markets, a terrible secret festered in the royal house. The city's downfall began not with a monster, but with a king's transgression. King Laius, the ruler of Thebes, committed a grave crime. While a guest in another kingdom, he abducted a beautiful young prince named Chrysippus. This was more than a political misstep. It was a profound violation of the sacred laws of hospitality, a direct insult to the gods themselves. In some versions of the myth, the wrath that followed came from Hera, the queen of the gods, who sent a punishment specifically tailored to the king's hubris. In others, it was Apollo, the god of prophecy and order, who unleashed a curse upon the house of Laius for this act. The divine decree was chilling. The king would die by the hand of his own son, a son who would then marry his mother. It was a fate so horrific, so unnatural, that Laius believed he could outrun it. He and his wife, Queen Jocasta, pierced the infant's ankles and abandoned him on a mountainside to die. They thought the prophecy was undone. They were catastrophically wrong. The gods do not forget. Their justice, though slow, is inevitable. And so the instrument of that justice arrived at the gates of Thebes. It came not as an invading army, but as a single, chilling creature, the Sphinx. Sent by Hera as an agent of divine vengeance, she descended upon the road leading to the city. Imagine the scene for a traveler. The path to Thebes was the only safe route through the mountains, and there, perched on a high rock overlooking the pass, was a creature of nightmare. She had the body of a powerful lion, the wings of a giant eagle, and the face of a woman, but one filled with a cold, inhuman intelligence. Her purpose was simple and merciless. She would stop every traveler, every merchant, every hopeful soul approaching Thebes, and pose her one infamous riddle. Failure meant a swift and gruesome death, devoured on the spot. Success was thought to be impossible. The effect on Thebes was instant and total paralysis. Trade ceased, news from the outside world stopped, no one could enter, and few dared to leave. The city became a prison, cut off from all supplies and allies. Famine began to creep through the streets, and a deep, suffocating despair settled over the people. They were not under siege by a foreign power. They were being strangled by a manifestation of their own king's hidden sin. The Sphinx was both the punishment and the symptom. She was the physical proof that the royal house was cursed, and her presence on that road ensured the entire city would suffer for the crimes of its leader. Thebes needed a savior, a hero who could break this supernatural deadlock. But in this story, the hero who answers that call does not bring salvation. He merely redirects the course of the curse. The city's desperate cry for a riddle solver was, in truth, an invitation for the final act of the prophecy to begin. This creature was a masterpiece of divine vengeance, a hybrid of terrifying purpose. The Theban Sphinx was not the serene, recumbent guardian of the Egyptian deserts. That ancient figure was a symbol of royal power and protection, a colossal, mostly human form gazing calmly toward the horizon. The Greek Sphinx was something else entirely, a being designed for psychological terror and violent execution. Her form was a patchwork of lethal attributes. She possessed the body of a lion, a creature synonymous with raw, untamed strength and ferocity. This gave her the power to overpower any human with ease. From her shoulders sprang the vast wings of a great bird, often an eagle, granting her the freedom of the skies and a terrifying vantage point from which to survey her domain. Her face, however, was that of a woman, beautiful and intelligent, a chilling mask of humanity atop a beast. Some accounts even add the writhing tail of a serpent, introducing the element of venom and stealth. Every part of her was a symbol. The human head represented cunning and cruel intellect. The lion's body was pure, predatory force. The wings spoke of inescapable reach, and the serpent's tail hinted at a poison that worked slowly, a metaphor for the slow strangulation of Thebes itself. Her very name may come from the Greek word sphingo, meaning to bind tight or to strangle, which perfectly describes both her method of killing and the fate she brought upon the city. You can see her depicted on ancient Greek vases and in fragments of sculpture, always in a posture of alert menace, often perched above a scene of despair or defeat. She is not a mindless beast, but a calculating executioner, her human eyes coldly assessing her next victim. This was the monster that held a kingdom hostage, a puzzle wrapped in claws and feathers, whose true weapon was not her strength but her mind. The monster's weapon was a single sentence. The riddle of the Theban Sphinx is deceptively simple, a line of poetry that has echoed for millennia. What creature, it asks, goes on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? On the surface, it sounds almost childish, a playful brain teaser. But for the desperate travelers on that road, it was a death sentence wrapped in metaphor. The Sphinx's method was a form of cruel psychological warfare. She did not simply leap from the rocks to tear her victims apart. Instead, she forced them into a deadly intellectual duel. She made them stop, think, and engage. In that moment of frantic mental scrambling, the victim became complicit in their own potential demise, their hope for survival pinned entirely on the agility of their own mind. This was the Sphinx's true genius. She turned human curiosity and reason into the very trap that sealed their fate. The riddle itself is a beautiful and brutal metaphor for a single human life. The morning with 4 legs represents infancy when a baby crawls on all 4s. Noon, standing tall on 2 legs, is the prime of adulthood. The evening with 3 legs symbolizes old age when a person walks with the aid of a cane. The answer, of course, is a human being. It is a profound philosophical observation condensed into a handful of words. The Sphinx was not asking about a mythical beast or a hidden object. She was asking her victims to define the very nature of their own existence. To solve it required a moment of deep self-reflection, a clarity of thought that panic and fear utterly destroy. Think about the sheer horror of that situation. A traveler, weary from the road, suddenly confronted by this winged horror. Their life depends on solving a riddle that is, at its heart, about the journey they themselves are on. The pressure would be unimaginable, clouding the mind with dread. The Sphinx relied on that terror. She presented a question about humanity to humans who are too frightened to see themselves in the answer. This reveals her cruel intelligence in its fullest form. She wielded a truth so fundamental it became invisible under duress, making her not just a monster of myth, but a chilling philosopher of despair. The road below the Sphinx's rock became a gallery of silent terror. We do not know exactly how each victim met their end, but ancient sources paint a grim picture. Some say she simply pounced, her lion's strength overwhelming them in an instant before she consumed her prey. Others suggest a more theatrical, cruel end, that she would strangle them with her powerful hands or cast their broken bodies from the cliff, adding their bones to the growing pile at the base of her perch. This was not a quick hunt for sustenance, it was a ritual of despair. Each failure was a public spectacle, a message carved in flesh and bone for the next trembling traveler to witness. The cost to Thebes was measured in more than just corpses. The city was bleeding its future. The young men, the strongest and the bravest, were the ones most likely to attempt the journey or be sent to seek help. One by one, they vanished on that mountain road, leaving behind families shrouded in grief and a city growing weaker by the day. Trade routes withered. No merchants dared approach, cutting off supplies of grain, metal, and news from the wider world. Allies could not send aid, for their messengers would never return. Thebes became an island of dread, surrounded by a moat of pure fear. The very air grew heavy with the stench of decay and defeat. Imagine the view from the city walls, looking toward that distant cliff. You could not see the monster herself, but you could see the consequences: the empty, silent road, the distant silhouette of the rock, and perhaps on a clear day, the faint, pale gleam of what could only be bones accumulating like a gruesome monument. This was the true genius of the punishment. The Sphinx did not need to breach the walls. She simply made the world outside those walls impossible to reach. The city was dying of starvation and hopelessness, strangled as surely as her victims. It was in this atmosphere of utter desperation that King Creon, who ruled after the death of Laius, made a proclamation born of pure despair. He offered a reward so immense it was a measure of their collective terror, the kingdom itself. Whoever could destroy the Sphinx would be made king of Thebes and given the hand of the widowed queen Jocasta in marriage. It was a prize meant to lure a god or a demigod. Instead, it called forth a wandering stranger, a man with a limp and a hidden past, who carried with him the solution to the riddle and the final, terrible key to the city's cursed destiny. The city's despair finally crystallized into a formal, desperate plea. With no king on the throne, the duty fell to Creon, brother to the widowed queen Jocasta. Acting as regent, he faced an impossible situation. The Sphinx's blockade was a slow, certain death for Thebes, and conventional strength was useless against it. So Creon turned to the only currency left, the kingdom itself. He stood before the weary citizens and issued a proclamation that echoed through the silent streets. He offered the ultimate reward to any man from any land who could rid them of the monster. The hero would be crowned the new king of Thebes, and to solidify his rule, he would be given the hand of Queen Jocasta in marriage. On the surface, it was a logical move. It unified the prize of power with the promise of political stability, a fresh start for a broken city. The people likely saw it as a beacon of hope, a gamble worth taking to restore life and trade to their homes. But beneath that practical surface lay a layer of devastating irony so thick it chills the bone. Think about what Creon was actually offering: the throne of a city currently being punished for the sins of its former king, Laius. And the hand of the very queen who was Laius's wife, the mother of the infant sent to die on the mountain. The reward was not a clean slate, it was the epicenter of the curse itself. By offering Jocasta's hand, Creon was unknowingly putting a bounty on the fulfillment of the very prophecy he was trying to escape. The oracle had foretold that the son of Laius would kill his father and marry his mother. Now the city was publicly advertising for a stranger to come marry the mother. They were begging for the final piece of the puzzle to click into place. This decree was not a solution, it was a trap baited with a crown, and into this trap, walking down that very mountain road, came a traveler. He was a man named Oedipus, famous for his sharp mind, but marked by a limp from wounded ankles. He was fleeing a terrible prophecy he had heard in Delphi, one that said he would kill his father and marry his mother. Believing the king and queen of Corinth who raised him were his true parents, he had vowed never to return, wandering to avoid this horrible fate. When he heard of Creon's offer, he saw not a throne but a purpose. Here was a chance to be a hero, to use his famed intelligence to save a city and win a kingdom far from the home he feared. He did not know that every step toward Thebes was a step toward the parents he had never met. The city's cry for a savior had reached the one man in all of Greece whose arrival would guarantee its destruction. Oedipus approached the crossroads, his walking staff striking the dusty earth with a steady, rhythmic tap. He was a man defined by a paradox, famed for his cleverness yet utterly blind to the truth of his own life. Years before, a shadow had fallen over him at the Oracle of Delphi. The priestess there, breathing the sacred fumes, had spoken a horror he could not forget. She told him he was destined to murder his own father and then marry his own mother. The prophecy struck him like a physical blow. He loved Polybus and Merope, the king and queen of Corinth, who had raised him as their own beloved son. To protect them from this unspeakable fate, he made the only choice he thought he had. He turned his back on Corinth forever, vowing to wander far from the people he believed were his parents, a self-imposed exile to keep them safe. He did not know the cruelest joke of all. Polybus and Merope were not his birth parents. As an infant, he had been found on a mountainside, his ankles pierced and bound, by a shepherd who took pity on him. That shepherd had given the baby to the Corinthian royal couple, who raised him as their own, never telling him of his true, tragic origins. So Oedipus fled from a fate he believed was ahead of him, not realizing he was actually running directly along its preordained path. He was intelligent, yes, and proud of his ability to outthink any problem. He carried himself with the bearing of a man determined to carve his own destiny with his wits and his will. His journey was one of deliberate escape, a heroic effort to defy the gods themselves. And so, when his travels brought him to the outskirts of a distressed and silent Thebes, he saw not a cursed city but an opportunity. Here was a kingdom in desperate need of a savior, a monster that could be defeated not by strength but by intellect. It was the perfect stage for a man like him to prove his worth and build a new life far from the terrible prophecy he feared. He walked toward the city gates, a heroic wanderer answering a call for help, completely unaware that every step was a move in a game the gods had already won. He was not arriving at a random city, he was coming home. The path ahead was unnaturally still, the only sound the crunch of gravel under his sandals and the tap of his walking staff. Then he saw it, the silhouette against the sky, a shape of impossible anatomy perched upon a jagged outcrop. The air grew cold, the Sphinx shifted, her wings rustling like dry parchment, and her head turned. Her gaze was not bestial, but chillingly human, intelligent and utterly devoid of mercy. It fixed upon Oedipus, pinning him in place as surely as a spear. She did not roar. Instead, her voice, when it came, was clear and cold, echoing off the stone walls of the pass. It was the voice of a judge delivering a sentence, not a monster issuing a threat. She recited the words that had ended so many lives. What creature goes on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? The riddle hung in the dusty air between them. For Oedipus, this was not a moment of terror, but of pure focus. His entire life had been a series of intellectual triumphs, a belief that his mind could outmaneuver any obstacle, even fate itself. He stood there, a stranger in a foreign land, weighing the simple poetry of the question. He saw past the surface, past the pressure of the moment. He thought not of mythical beasts, but of the fundamental journey of a life. The morning crawling, the prime of life standing tall, the twilight years leaning on a staff, a slow, sure understanding dawned on his face. He did not hesitate. His reply was calm, definitive. The answer is man. In the morning of his life, he crawls on all 4s as an infant. At noon, he walks upright on 2 legs as an adult. And in the evening, he uses a staff as a 3rd leg in his old age. The silence that followed was deeper than before. The Sphinx did not move. Her great, inscrutable eyes held his for a long, terrible moment. Then, without a sound, she stirred. In some versions of the myth, she let out a shriek of pure frustration, the sound of a divine instrument realizing its purpose was spent. In others, she simply gathered herself, the defeat absolute and silent. With a powerful beat of her eagle's wings, she launched herself from the cliff. But she did not attack. She flew away and, according to the legend, cast herself from a great height into the sea or onto the rocks below, destroyed by the revelation of her own secret. The monster was vanquished, the road to Thebes was open. Oedipus stood alone on the now quiet path, the dust settling around him. He had done it. With a single word, he had broken the curse that strangled a city. He felt the surge of triumph, the validation of his lifelong belief in his own intellect. He had solved the ultimate riddle about mankind, but in his moment of supreme victory, he failed to ask the most important question of all. The riddle was about humanity in general, but what about the specific man standing there on the road? What was the story of his own morning, his own noon, his own evening? He had just described the entire arc of a human life without recognizing where he himself was standing within it. He walked toward Thebes a conquering hero, ready to claim his throne and his queen, utterly blind to the horrifying truth that with each step he was not walking toward his future, but directly into the waiting arms of his cursed past. The answer hung in the air, a single, simple word: man. Oedipus explained his reasoning with the calm clarity of a scholar. The creature that walks on 4 legs in the morning is a human baby crawling. At the noon of life, it is an adult walking upright on 2 legs, and in the evening, it is an elder using a cane as a 3rd leg. It was a perfect, elegant solution, a recognition of the universal human journey from infancy to old age. For a long, silent moment, the Sphinx did not move. Her great, inhuman eyes seemed to process this mortal truth. Then, something within her shattered. Her power was not in her claws or her wings, but in the unsolvable mystery she embodied. That mystery was now gone, unraveled by a wandering stranger's intellect. In most versions of the myth, the creature did not attack. Instead, consumed by a fury born of shame and futility, she let out a terrible cry and flung herself from her high rock, plummeting to her death on the stones below. The divine punishment, defeated not by a sword but by a thought. This moment is one of the most powerful symbols in all of mythology. It represents the triumph of human reason over monstrous, chaotic force. The Sphinx was an agent of divine vengeance, a symbol of the inscrutable, terrifying will of the gods that could not be fought with conventional strength. Oedipus, with nothing but his own mind, dismantled her. He looked at a riddle about the essence of life and saw the answer in himself and every person around him. In that instant, mortal intellect destroyed a divine instrument. It was a victory for human potential, a declaration that logic and understanding could overcome even the most terrifying supernatural obstacles. The road to Thebes was suddenly, eerily quiet. The blockade was broken, the monster was gone. Oedipus must have felt an immense surge of pride and vindication. He had outwitted a goddess-sent terror and saved a great city. He had proven that a man could, through his own wits, carve his own destiny and defy the darkest of fates. But the symbolism of his answer holds a deeper, more tragic layer he could not see. He had defined the 3 stages of a human life, yet he was completely blind to the truth of his own. He understood mankind in the abstract, but not the specific, cursed man he himself was. In solving the riddle, he shattered one form of divine power, only to walk directly into the arms of another, far more personal one. The Sphinx was gone, but the prophecy was very much alive, and he was now walking straight toward its fulfillment, believing himself a liberator when he was, in fact, the final piece of a cursed puzzle. News of the monster's defeat raced back to the city like a wildfire of pure relief. The silence that had choked Thebes for so long shattered into a cacophony of joyous shouts, ringing bells, and weeping laughter. From the palace to the poorest alley, people poured into the streets, embracing strangers, their faces wet with tears of deliverance. They had lived for so long under the shadow of that winged terror, their world shrinking day by day, that freedom felt like a physical weight lifted from their chests. And at the center of it all was the stranger, Oedipus, the man with the quick mind and the steady gaze. To them, he was not just a hero, he was a divine gift, a living miracle who had accomplished the impossible with a single, brilliant word. They lifted him onto their shoulders, a conquering champion borne through the cheering crowds toward the royal palace. There was no debate, no political maneuvering. Creon, true to his desperate oath, immediately presented the rewards. The crown of Thebes was placed upon Oedipus's head, its weight a symbol of gratitude and newfound hope. And then, to cement his rule and bring stability to the royal line, he was given the hand of Queen Jocasta, the widowed wife of the late King Laius. She was a woman seasoned by grief and the long, grim years of the siege, and in this handsome, intelligent savior, she saw the promise of a new beginning for herself and her city. Their marriage was not a political coldness, but a genuine union of relief and admiration, a partnership forged in the shared joy of liberation. For years, Thebes flourished. The roads filled with merchants and travelers once more. The storehouses bulged with grain, and the sounds of construction and commerce echoed where only fearful whispers had been. Oedipus proved to be a wise and capable ruler, his cleverness translating well into governance. He and Jocasta built a life together, and they were blessed with children, 2 sons and 2 daughters. The palace halls, once heavy with dread, now rang with the sounds of family and celebration. To any observer, this was the perfect storybook ending. The monster was dead, the curse was broken, and a noble king and queen ruled over a prosperous, happy kingdom. It was the restoration of order, the triumph of good over evil, the happy ending that every myth seems to promise. The audience, for a moment, is allowed to believe it. We see the hero rewarded, the city saved, the future secure. It is a period of golden stability, a breath held in perfect peace. But this peace is the setting for the most devastating dramatic irony in all of literature. Because we, the audience, know the hidden truth, we know the prophecy, we know the story of the infant on the mountain. And so, every tender moment between Oedipus and Jocasta, every proud glance at their children, is layered with a horror they cannot see. Their happiness is built upon a foundation of utter catastrophe, and the longer this idyllic period lasts, the higher the tension coils, waiting for the moment when the truth finally cracks the world they have so carefully built. But beneath this golden peace, a hidden crime festered. Years before he ever faced the Sphinx on the dusty road that led him away from the oracle at Delphi, Oedipus had reached a place where 3 paths met. It was a narrow, sun-baked crossroads, and there he encountered an old man in a chariot, accompanied by a handful of attendants. The man was arrogant, demanding the right of way, and when Oedipus stood his ground, a scuffle broke out. The old man swung a whip or a goad, striking Oedipus on the head. In a blinding flash of rage, the young traveler reacted. He lashed out with the only weapon he had, his heavy walking staff. The blows fell with terrible force, and when the violence cleared, the old man lay dead in the dust, his attendants scattered or slain. Oedipus, believing he had merely defended himself against a random, aggressive noble, continued on his way, burying the incident in his mind as an ugly but justified act of self-preservation. He did not ask the man's name. He did not recognize the seal on the chariot. He simply walked away, unknowingly carrying the weight of a king's death on his shoulders. That arrogant old man was King Laius of Thebes, his biological father, traveling to consult the same oracle about the very Sphinx that now plagued his city. In a single moment of hot-tempered violence at a lonely crossroads, Oedipus had already fulfilled the first horrific half of the prophecy. He was a patricide long before he was a hero. This truth recontextualizes everything. His triumphant arrival in Thebes, his solving of the riddle, his marriage to Jocasta, none of it was a fresh start. It was the second act of a tragedy already written in blood. He entered the city not as a pure savior, but as a man who had, however unknowingly, murdered its former king and widowed its queen. The very intellect that saved Thebes was wielded by the hands that had killed its ruler. The irony is so thick it feels like a physical weight. The city celebrated the man who had broken the curse, never realizing he was the living embodiment of the curse's first and most violent chapter. He had outwitted the monster sent to punish his father's house, but only after he himself had become the instrument of that punishment. The prophecy was not a linear sequence, it was a tightening noose, and with every step Oedipus took to avoid it, he pulled the knot tighter around his own neck. He believed he was a wanderer carving his own path, but he was actually a ghost walking the precise route laid out for him by fate, leaving a trail of unintended destruction behind. The golden peace of Thebes did not last. After years of prosperity, a new shadow fell upon the city, one that no wall could keep out. A creeping sickness blighted the land. Crops withered in the fields, cattle grew sick and died, and a terrible plague swept through the streets, claiming the young and the strong with a cruel indifference. Women suffered in childbirth, and infants were born lifeless. The city that had been saved was now dying a slow, agonizing death from within. To the ancient Greek mind, such a widespread, unnatural disaster was never just bad luck. It was a sign, a symptom of a deeper sickness in the social and spiritual order. They called this concept miasma, a stain of pollution that clung to a community when a grave crime, like murder, especially within a family, had gone unpunished. The gods themselves were offended, and their displeasure manifested as blight and disease until the moral balance was restored. The people, desperate and afraid, turned to their savior king, Oedipus. Surely the man who had solved the Sphinx's riddle could solve this new, more mysterious affliction. Oedipus, ever the decisive ruler, had already sent his brother-in-law, Creon, to the oracle at Delphi to seek answers from Apollo. Creon returned with a solemn and chilling pronouncement. The god's message was clear. The plague was a divine punishment. A pollution festered within the walls of Thebes because the murder of its former king, Laius, had never been avenged. The killer remained at large, living among them, and the city would know no relief until he was identified, exiled, or destroyed. Upon hearing this, Oedipus reacted with the full force of his kingly authority and personal pride. He was furious not at the oracle, but at the idea that such a vile criminal could still walk free in his kingdom. He stood before his suffering people and made a solemn public vow. He would find this murderer himself. He would hunt down the man who killed King Laius with the same relentless determination he had used to solve the riddle. He pronounced a terrible curse upon the unknown killer, swearing that the man would be cast out, shunned by all, and live a life of utter misery. In a final, dramatic gesture, he extended the curse to anyone who might be shielding the criminal, knowingly or not. The people rallied to his passion. Here was their hero king once again stepping forward to cleanse their city of a monstrous evil. They saw a leader of uncompromising justice, a detective king who would root out the hidden poison. They could not see the devastating irony that hung in the air, thicker than the plague's own miasma. Oedipus, in his rage for justice, was vowing to track down and punish a man who did not exist. He was not searching for a stranger hiding in the shadows. He was launching a meticulous public investigation into the life and crimes of Oedipus himself. The hunter and the prey were the same person. With every decree, every question asked, every clue pursued, he was not moving closer to solving the crime, but methodically building the case for his own ruin. The myth transforms in this moment from a story of external monster slaying to an internal detective tragedy, where the greatest mystery the hero must solve is the truth of his own identity. Oedipus launched his investigation with the fierce determination of a man who believed justice was a puzzle to be solved. His first move was to summon the most revered seer in all of Greece, the blind prophet Thebes. If anyone could see the hidden truth, it would be the man who saw not with his eyes, but with the inner sight granted by the gods. The arrival of the old prophet, led by a young boy, cast a solemn hush over the court. Oedipus pleaded with him, demanding the name of Laius's murderer for the sake of the dying city. But Thebes, his blind eyes seeming to look straight through the king, refused to speak. He begged Oedipus to let the matter rest, to stop this inquiry. His reluctance only fueled the king's famous temper. Oedipus accused the prophet of being complicit in the crime, of plotting with Creon to steal the throne. This public insult finally broke Tyreus' silence. In a voice heavy with sorrow and divine certainty, he spoke the unbearable truth. You yourself are the murderer you seek. The pollution infecting Thebes is you. You are the man living in foulest shame with your own kin, blind to the horrors of your own house. The court froze. Oedipus, of course, erupted in furious denial. He mocked the prophet's blindness, both physical and, as he saw it, prophetic. How could a man who solved the Sphinx's riddle be accused of such a vile act by a man who could not even see the sun? He dismissed Tyreus' words as the ravings of a charlatan, a political tool of his enemies. Yet the accusation, once spoken, hung in the air like a poison, impossible to fully dispel. To calm her husband's rage and disprove the seer, Queen Jocasta stepped forward. She offered what she believed was comforting proof that all prophets were false. She recounted the old prophecy given to Laius that he would be killed by his own son. But look, she said, that prophecy was a lie. Laius was murdered by robbers at a crossroads, not by his son. And our son, she revealed with a chilling casualness, was exposed on a mountainside as an infant, his ankles pinned together. He died there, she assured Oedipus. So you see, the gods do not speak clearly to men. Her words, meant to soothe, struck Oedipus like a thunderbolt. A crossroads, robbers, a man of Laius's description. The pieces of a distant, violent memory began to shift and lock together in his mind. He pressed her for details. When did this happen? Where exactly was this crossroads? How many attackers were there? Jocasta confirmed the time and place and mentioned that a lone servant, an eyewitness, had fled the scene and returned to Thebes, begging to be sent far away to the royal pastures when he saw Oedipus on the throne. Oedipus ordered this man to be found and brought before him immediately. The noose was tightening, but Oedipus still clung to a thread of hope. There was a discrepancy. Jocasta spoke of multiple robbers, while Oedipus remembered fighting a single old man and his attendants. If the servant confirmed the story of many attackers, then he could not be the guilty one. But then a new figure arrived, a messenger from Corinth. He came with somber news. King Polybus, the man Oedipus believed was his father, had died of old age. For a moment, Oedipus felt a wave of relief mixed with grief. See, he said to Jocasta, the prophecy said I would kill my father, and he died peacefully in his bed. This proved the oracles wrong, but the Corinthian messenger, wanting to offer further comfort, revealed a deeper secret. Polybus was not your real father, he said. I myself received you as a baby from a shepherd on Mount Cithaeron. Your ankles were bound and pierced, which is how you got your name, Oedipus, which means swollen foot. The world seemed to tilt. The story of the abandoned infant, the pierced ankles, it was no longer just the tale of Jocasta's dead child. It was the story of his own mysterious origin. Jocasta, hearing this, went deathly pale. She now saw the horrifying pattern forming before her blind husband could. She begged him, her voice breaking with a terror she could not name, to stop the investigation. No more questions, she pleaded. For the sake of your own life, let it be. But Oedipus, the relentless detective, could not stop. The puzzle was nearly complete, and he had to see the final picture. He demanded the last witness, the Theban shepherd who had given the baby away. And as fate would have it, this was the very same man who had witnessed Laius's murder, the sole survivor now being brought from the fields. When the old shepherd stood before him, trembling and broken, the Corinthian messenger recognized him instantly. This is the man who gave me the child, he declared. Under Oedipus's intense, desperate questioning, the shepherd's resistance crumbled. He confessed the terrible truth he had carried for decades. Yes, he had taken the infant son of Laius and Jocasta, the child condemned by prophecy. He was supposed to leave it to die, but out of pity, he gave it to a wandering stranger, and that child was you, Oedipus. And as for the murder at the crossroads, the shepherd, through sobs, admitted the final, devastating detail. The reports of many robbers were a lie, a story he invented out of fear. There was only one attacker, a single, furious young man. Every piece of evidence, every reluctant testimony, every forgotten memory now slammed into place with the force of a collapsing world. The riddle of his own life was solved. The man who went on 4 legs, the abandoned infant, was him. The man who walked on 2 legs, the traveler at the crossroads, was him. The man who now stood on a 3rd leg, a king leaning on the staff of his authority, was him, soon to be blind and exiled. The detective had found the killer, and the killer was the king in the mirror. Jocasta's mind began to race, a frantic, silent calculation behind her calm, queenly mask. Her own words echoed back to her, a story she had told 100 times without truly hearing it. A crossroads, a single old man struck down, the timing, that specific year when the Sphinx first appeared. Her eyes, against her will, drifted to her husband's feet as he paced in angry confusion. She had always known of his scars, those old, twisted wounds on his ankles he said were from a childhood accident. A piercing, she had thought, the shepherd's story of the infant with pinned ankles. The pieces, once separate and harmless, now flew together in her mind and locked with a soundless, terrible click. The blood drained from her face. The room seemed to grow distant, the voices of Oedipus and the messengers fading into a dull roar. Her comforting proof had become a confession. The baby did not die on the mountain. That baby grew into a man. That man killed his father at the crossroads. That man solved the riddle and came to Thebes. That man now stood before her, her husband, the father of her children. The horror was not abstract, not a story about a stranger. It was in the bed she shared, in the faces of her 2 sons and 2 daughters, in the very foundation of her life and her kingdom. Her attempts to stop the inquiry changed in that instant. Her earlier pleas had been born of annoyance and a wife's concern for her husband's distress. Now they became the frantic, clawing actions of a mother trying to prevent an unspeakable truth from devouring her family. She grabbed Oedipus's arm, her voice a raw whisper stripped of all its royal authority. "Stop," she begged him. "I implore you, do not do this. For your own sake, for my sake, ask no more questions. What does it matter who your parents were? Let it be." But Oedipus, the brilliant detective, the riddle-solver, misinterpreted her terror entirely. He saw only a woman's irrational fear, a superstitious dread of oracles he believed he was finally disproving. He shook her off, his focus absolute. He could not see that her despair was not for a potential shame, but for a catastrophe already complete. As he turned back to the trembling shepherd, demanding the final truth with the relentless logic that had saved the city, Jocasta took a step back. The light in her eyes died. She looked at the man she loved, the children they had created, and saw only a blasphemy made flesh. The knowledge was a physical weight, a sickness in the soul. Without another word, she turned and walked slowly from the hall, her silence more terrible than any scream. She moved through the palace corridors like a ghost, seeing the happy years of her reign for what they truly were, a beautiful, gilded nightmare. Every memory of tenderness, every pride in their family, curdled into a source of ultimate shame. The queen, who had survived a siege and welcomed a savior, now understood she was the central figure in a tragedy so profound it would echo for millennia. Her realization was the calm before the storm, a moment of absolute, devastating clarity that left no room for hope, only the grim acceptance of what must come next. The old shepherd stood trembling before the king, his face etched with a lifetime of fear and regret. He was the last living witness, the man who had carried the infant to the mountain and the sole survivor of the murder at the crossroads. Oedipus loomed over him, his voice a mixture of royal command and personal desperation. He demanded the truth, the final answer to the riddle of his own life. The Corinthian messenger pointed at the shepherd and confirmed it. "This is the man who gave me the child." Under the weight of this confrontation, the shepherd's last defenses shattered. Yes, he confessed, his words barely a whisper that echoed like a shout in the silent hall. "The child came from the house of Laius. I was ordered to leave it on the mountainside to die." His voice broke with the memory of that tiny, wounded form, but I pitied it, so I gave the baby to this man, hoping it would be taken far away to a new life. He could not even look at Oedipus as he spoke the final, irrevocable sentence, "And if you are that child, then you are the most wretched of men." The last puzzle piece, held in reserve for decades, now slid into its appointed place. It snapped into the mosaic with an almost audible click, completing a picture not of a hero's origin, but of a curse fulfilled in every terrible detail. In that instant, every separate thread of Oedipus' existence, the prophecy at Delphi, the fight at the crossroads, the solving of the riddle, the marriage to Jocasta, suddenly wove together into a single, suffocating tapestry of doom. The world did not so much crash down around him as it inverted. The ground beneath his feet, the throne he sat upon, the family he loved, all transformed into monuments to his own unimaginable crimes. He was not a king but a patricide, not a husband but a man married to his mother, not a father but the brother of his own children. Every triumph of his intellect, every decision made in pride or defiance, was revealed as a step on a preordained path to this precise moment of ruin. The man who had solved the Sphinx riddle about mankind had finally, catastrophically, solved the riddle of himself. The knowledge was a physical force, a wave of pure, annihilating truth that left no room for denial, no escape into ignorance. He stood utterly still, the brilliant detective finally facing the murderer he had hunted, seeing his own reflection in the verdict. The silence that followed the shepherd's confession was absolute. Oedipus did not scream, he did not rage. The truth was too vast, too complete for any outward outburst to contain it. He turned away from the old man and the messenger, his body moving as if through deep water, and walked slowly from the hall. He climbed the stairs toward the private chambers of the palace, a place that hours before had been his home. The corridors he knew so well now felt like a stranger's house, every tapestry and column a witness to his shame. He reached the doors to the royal bedroom and pushed them open. Inside, he found the final, terrible confirmation. Queen Jocasta, his wife and mother, had hanged herself from the ceiling beams, her body still swaying gently in the still air. The sight of her, the ultimate consequence of his unwitting crimes, severed the last tether holding his sanity in place. A sound escaped him, something between a groan and a howl, torn from a place deeper than grief. He stumbled forward, his hands reaching not for her but for her robe. With a violent tug, he tore the golden brooches that pinned the garment at her shoulders. These were not weapons of convenience, they were instruments of profound symbolism. They were the pins of a queen, the adornments of the woman he had loved and defiled. He took the long, sharp pins in his fists, their cold metal biting into his palms. Then, with a cry that held all the agony of his realized life, he raised his hands and drove the points not into his heart but into his own eyes. Once, twice, again and again, he stabbed at the organs that had failed him so utterly. He blinded himself in a storm of self-inflicted violence, preferring eternal darkness to the sight of the world he had ruined. This act is one of the most analyzed moments in literature. Why blinding? Why not suicide? The answer lies in the cruel poetry of his punishment. Oedipus had spent his life believing in the power of his own sight, his own insight. His eyes saw the answer to the Sphinx's riddle when no one else could. Yet those same eyes looked upon his mother as a wife, looked upon his children as his offspring, and saw nothing wrong. His physical sight was a lie, a filter that showed him a world of heroic triumph while hiding the horrific reality beneath. By destroying his eyes, he was rejecting that false sight. He was enacting a justice more fitting than death. He had seen what no man should ever see. He had lived a life that should have been invisible to him. So he made it so. The blinding was a physical manifestation of the internal darkness that had always been there, the ignorance that his brilliant mind could not penetrate. It was a way to literally not see the faces of his children, who were also his siblings, or the city he had saved and damned. In that moment of horrific self-mutilation, a brutal irony was born. The man who was physically blind, Tyreus, had seen the truth all along. The man with perfect sight, Oedipus, had been spiritually blind. Now, with his eyes destroyed and blood streaming down his face, Oedipus gained the very insight he had lacked. He saw everything with terrible, painful clarity. He understood the prophecy, his journey, the monstrous shape of his life. His physical blindness became the price for this awful enlightenment. He traded the sight of the external world for the unbearable vision of his own soul, a vision from which there was no looking away. Her cries of protest faded into a terrible, knowing silence. While Oedipus pressed the shepherd for the final truth in the public hall, Jocasta turned and walked away. The queen moved through her palace, a place that had been her sanctuary and her throne, now seeing it as a gilded cage built on a foundation of sin. She did not wait for the official verdict. The calculation was already complete in her mind, the evidence irrefutable. The infant she had ordered killed had lived. The husband she had loved and ruled beside was that child. The children they had raised together were also her grandchildren. Every pillar of her identity, mother, wife, queen, splintered at once under the weight of this revelation. For Jocasta, the horror was multifaceted, a trap with no exit. There was the overwhelming shame, the violation of the most sacred natural laws, which made her a figure of cosmic disgrace. But woven through that was a uniquely maternal anguish. Decades ago, she had made a choice, a brutal, desperate attempt to protect her husband and her kingdom from a terrible prophecy. She had agreed to have her own newborn son exposed on the mountain. That act, meant to defy fate, was the very mechanism that ensured fate's victory. Her attempt to destroy the child set him on the path that led him back to her bed. Her life was a perfect, cruel circle of cause and catastrophic effect. She had tried to be an agent of her own destiny, and in doing so, she became the instrument of her own ruin. Retreating to the marital chamber, the heart of her private life now exposed as the epicenter of the tragedy, she saw only one path to sever the knot. Her death by her own hand was not an act of cowardice, but a final, terrible act of agency. It was the only way to erase the living proof of the blasphemy, to remove herself from the equation of the cursed family. In hanging herself, she completed the tragic arc that began the moment she handed her son to a servant. She becomes the first direct casualty of the fully realized truth, a queen ultimately dethroned not by politics or war, but by the devastating irony of her own long-ago decision to outsmart the gods. Blood streamed from his ruined eyes, but the deeper wound was the knowledge now seared into his soul. Oedipus, the man who had saved Thebes, was now its greatest pollution, a walking curse that had brought plague upon the very people he once liberated. The palace that had celebrated him was now a tomb of his own making. In the shattered silence that followed his self-blinding, power naturally shifted to the only remaining figure of authority, Creon. Jocasta's brother, the man who had once offered the kingdom as a reward, now returned to rule not by ambition but by grim necessity. Creon found himself in an impossible position. He held no personal malice toward Oedipus, but he was now the steward of a city still trembling under divine wrath. The oracle had been clear: the murderer of Laius must be punished to lift the plague. And there the murderer stood, blind and broken, begging for a punishment he himself had earlier decreed. Oedipus, in his agony, pleaded not for death but for exile. "Cast me out," he cried. "Let me be driven to the mountains, to the very place I should have died as an infant. Let me vanish, so Thebes may finally be clean." It was a plea for mercy wrapped in self-loathing. A desire to complete the circle fate had drawn for him decades before. But Creon, a cautious and pious man, hesitated. The matter was too great for him to decide alone. He told Oedipus they must wait for a final sign from the gods, from Apollo himself, to confirm whether exile or death was the proper course. This delay was not cruelty, but a recognition of the sacred order Oedipus had violated. The king could not simply banish the pollution. He had to follow the divine protocol to the letter, lest he bring a new curse upon the city. So for a time, Oedipus remained in Thebes, but he was a king no longer. He was transformed into a sightless beggar within his own palace, a living ghost. His daughters, the gentle Antigone and Ismene, became his guides, leading their father through the halls he could no longer see. The people who had once carried him on their shoulders now shrank back from his touch, fearing the miasma that clung to him. The savior had become the ultimate outcast, a walking lesson in the cruel reversals of fortune. When the divine word finally came, it confirmed exile. Creon, with a solemn duty, arranged for Oedipus to be led from the city gates. The departure was a mirror image of his triumphant entry. No cheers, only a heavy, fearful silence. He was led out by his loyal daughters, stepping from the polished marble floors of the palace onto the dusty road, leaving behind the throne, the crown, and the family that was no family. The man who had solved the riddle of mankind was now a riddle himself, a testament to the limits of human knowledge and the terrifying precision of fate. His journey was not over. In his old age, after years of wandering as a destitute and reviled figure, Oedipus would find a strange, final refuge in a sacred grove near Athens at a place called Colonus. This later chapter, told in Sophocles' final play, shows a transformed Oedipus. The broken beggar gains a mysterious, terrible power. His very presence, once a source of pollution, becomes a coveted blessing for the land that shelters his tomb. The gods, in their inscrutable way, grant him a peaceful, sacred death, transforming the polluted outcast into a protective spirit. This ending offers a faint, ambiguous light in the darkness, suggesting that even the most profound suffering can, through sheer endurance, attain a form of grim transcendence. But for Thebes, standing at the gates watching their blind king shuffle away, there was no such comfort. They had learned the hardest lesson of all, that a hero's brilliant victory can be the prelude to his and their ultimate ruin. The Sphinx was far more than a simple monster to be slain. In the grand design of this myth, she serves as a living symbol, a physical manifestation of the terrifying unknown that fate places before every human life. She is the inscrutable obstacle on the road, the question mark that blocks the path forward. Her riddle, after all, was not about a hidden treasure or a secret location, but about the very nature of human existence itself. Oedipus solved it perfectly in the abstract. He identified the pattern of a human life from cradle to cane. Yet his brilliant general answer highlighted his catastrophic specific failure. He understood mankind, but he did not understand himself. The Sphinx, in this light, becomes the ultimate test of self-knowledge, and Oedipus passed the intellectual exam while failing the personal one utterly. This is the core irony that gives the myth its enduring power. We can solve puzzles about the world, yet remain completely blind to the truths of our own origin and our own actions. The monster on the rock was a mirror, and Oedipus saw only the reflection of his own cleverness, not the cursed history staring back at him. Her role expands into other potent interpretations. Sent by the goddess Hera to punish Thebes, the Sphinx can be seen as an embodiment of destructive feminine power, a wrathful response to the crimes of men like King Laius. She is not mindless chaos, but calculated, intelligent vengeance. Her hybrid form, part human, part lion, part bird, makes her a being outside natural categories, much like the unnatural crimes of patricide and incest that define Oedipus' fate. She is chaos given a cruel mind. As the Strangler, her name perfectly describes her method. She did not just kill individuals, she slowly strangled the entire city of Thebes, cutting off its air supply of trade and hope. She was an economic and social plague before the biological plague ever arrived. In this, she becomes a symbol of any force that paralyzes a society, that halts progress and breeds despair from within. Ultimately, the Sphinx and her riddle are inseparable from the myth's central theme, the pursuit of knowledge and the terror of what we find. Oedipus spends his entire life seeking answers. He seeks answers from the oracle at Delphi. He seeks the answer to the Sphinx riddle. he seeks the answer to the murder of Laius. He is a relentless detective in his own life. But the myth asks a haunting question: what happens when the truth you discover is unbearable? The Sphinx presented that truth as a philosophical puzzle. Oedipus' own life became the devastating solution. Her defeat did not end the mystery. It simply transferred the question from an external monster to the internal landscape of the hero's soul. The real monster was never the creature on the rock, but the hidden story waiting to be uncovered. That single word, man, echoes far beyond the dusty Theban pass. At its heart, the Sphinx's riddle is a profound meditation on existence itself, a poetic summary of the ancient Greek understanding of a human life. The Greeks saw life not as a random series of events, but as a clear, inevitable arc with distinct stages, each with its own virtues and challenges. The morning or childhood was a time of dependency and learning. Noon, adulthood, was the period of action, achievement, and civic duty. The evening, old age, was a time for wisdom, reflection, and a gradual release from worldly concerns before death. The riddle perfectly encapsulates this entire journey in one elegant metaphor, asking the traveler to recognize the universal pattern they themselves are living. It is a question about the human condition in its totality. Oedipus answered it flawlessly because he understood the pattern intellectually. He saw the shape of a life from the outside. Yet this makes his personal failure so devastatingly ironic. He could define mankind in the abstract but remained utterly blind to the specific cursed man he was. The riddle's true, unspoken second question was not "what is man," but "who are you?" Oedipus never asked it of himself. This gap between general knowledge and self-knowledge is where the myth transcends its ancient origins and taps into something timeless. Centuries later, the psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud would look at this story and see not just a fateful tragedy, but a blueprint for the human subconscious. He proposed the idea of the Oedipus complex, suggesting that all young children experience subconscious feelings of rivalry with the parent of the same sex and attachment to the parent of the opposite sex. In Freud's interpretation, the myth represents the terrifying, buried realization of these universal but repressed desires. Oedipus acts out what every child subconsciously fantasizes about, and his self-blinding is a symbolic punishment for that forbidden wish. While modern psychology has largely moved beyond Freud's specific theories, his use of the myth highlights its enduring power as a story about hidden drives and the parts of ourselves we cannot or will not see. The riddle and its aftermath force us to confront a fundamental duality. We can be brilliant observers of the world, yet remain strangers to our own histories and motivations. We can solve the puzzle of humanity while failing the puzzle of our own soul. This is why the story of Oedipus and the Sphinx is not merely an exciting monster-slaying tale. It is a deep, uncomfortable exploration of identity. It asks how well any of us truly know the story of our own morning, our own origins. It questions whether we are walking confidently into our noon, aware of the roads we have taken and the choices we have made. And it hints that the evening of our lives may bring a reckoning with truths we spent a lifetime avoiding. The monster on the rock was ultimately a mirror, and the most terrifying reflection it offered was not of claws and wings, but of the human capacity for ignorance amidst great intelligence. The true horror of Oedipus's story lies in this relentless paradox. Every conscious choice he made, every step taken in what he believed was free will, became a thread weaving the very tapestry of his doom. He left Corinth to avoid killing his father, only to meet and murder Laius on that lonely road. He solved the Sphinx's riddle to win a kingdom, only to claim the throne and the wife that were his by cursed birthright. His intelligence and his determination, qualities we celebrate in a hero, were the very tools fate used to ensnare him. This creates an unbearable tension, the core of the tragedy. If every effort to escape destiny only tightens its grip, did Oedipus ever have a real choice? Or was he merely a puppet performing a script written by the gods before he was born? Ancient Greek thought often wrestled with this duality. Prophecy and oracle were central to their worldview, suggesting a future that was fixed and knowable. Yet they also valued human agency, the concept of character-driving action. The myth of Oedipus sits squarely in this agonizing middle ground. It presents a world where destiny is real and inescapable, but where the path to that destiny is paved by the individual's own nature and decisions. This brings us to the idea of hamartia, a term often translated as tragic flaw. For Oedipus, his hamartia is not a single evil trait, but a combination of qualities that are heroic in moderation but catastrophic in excess. His quick temper flares at the crossroads, turning a scuffle into a murder. His intellectual pride, his hubris, makes him certain he can outthink the gods and blinds him to the warnings of Tyres and the desperate pleas of Jocasta. He is a brilliant detective, but his investigation is fueled by a rage for certainty that refuses to stop until it destroys him. So the tragedy is not simply that a bad thing happened to a good man. It is that the man's greatest strengths, his decisive action and his brilliant mind, become the instruments of his ruin when applied without self-knowledge. This forces a difficult question. Is the story about the crushing inevitability of fate, or is it about the catastrophic consequences of acting in profound ignorance? Perhaps it is both. The prophecy set the boundaries of the prison, but Oedipus's own character ensured he would sprint headlong into every wall. He was free to choose his actions, but not free to escape the meaning of those actions once the truth was revealed. His ignorance was not a passive state, but an active force. He did not know who he was, but he insisted on acting as if he did, making kingly judgments, cursing a murderer, vowing to purge the city, all while being the source of the pollution himself. This is why the myth retains its gut-wrenching power millennia later. It mirrors a fundamental human anxiety. We all make choices based on incomplete information. We build lives on assumptions about our past and our identity. We pursue goals with confidence, believing we are steering our own ship. Oedipus's story asks what happens when the compass was broken from the start, when the map we are using is tragically, horrifically wrong. His fate whispers a chilling possibility that our most confident strides toward freedom might be steps on a path whose end was written long ago. The enduring power of the myth lies in its refusal to give a comforting answer. It holds the tension between destiny and choice forever taut, leaving us to wonder where the line is drawn and whether any of us could see it before it is too late. The blood and blindness of Thebes faded, but the image of the Sphinx refused to die. Long after the last echo of Oedipus' cry faded on that mountain road, the monster found a new life, immortalized not in myth but in art. Her first portraits were fired onto clay. Ancient Greek potters, especially in the 5th century before the Common Era, depicted the scene again and again. On a famous red figure vase, we do not see a violent confrontation. Instead, we see a moment of profound quiet. Oedipus sits on a rock, his chin resting thoughtfully in his hand, the very picture of a philosopher deep in contemplation. The Sphinx perches above him on her column, her wings folded, her human face calm and expectant. The art captures the essence of their duel. It was a battle of minds, a silent, intense struggle of intellect against an impossible puzzle. These vases were not just decorations, they were storytelling devices, spreading the myth across the Mediterranean and cementing the Sphinx form in the cultural imagination, a hybrid terror forever linked to a moment of thought. Centuries later, during the Renaissance, artists rediscovered the myths of antiquity. The Sphinx re-emerged, but her meaning began to shift. She was no longer solely the agent of Hera's wrath. To painters and sculptors fascinated by mystery and the unknown, she became a symbol of the enigmatic itself. She represented the secrets of nature, the riddles of fate, and the dangerous allure of feminine mystery. You can see this in the works of artists like Gustave Moreau in the 19th century, who painted her as a beautiful, sphinx-like femme fatale, serene and inscrutable, guarding esoteric truths. Her form evolved, sometimes losing its wings, sometimes becoming more elegant, but always retaining that core combination of human intelligence and animal power. She became less a specific monster from a story and more a universal icon for any profound, unanswerable question. This iconic status allowed her to leap from ancient myth into the very fabric of modern storytelling. Her influence is everywhere in the riddling creatures of later folklore and fantasy. Think of the tense life-or-death riddle game between Bilbo Baggins and Gollum in the dark caves under the misty mountains in The Hobbit. The structure is directly borrowed from the Theban standoff, a battle of wits where a wrong answer means being eaten. The Sphinx legacy is the template for any creature that uses a puzzle as a trap, from the Sphinx-like guardians in countless video games to the cunning villains in films who prefer intellectual combat to physical brawls. The word Sphinx itself has entered our language as a shorthand. To call someone or something Sphinx-like is to say they are inscrutable, mysterious, impossible to read. A politician giving a cryptic answer, a scientist pondering an unsolvable equation, a silent, smiling stranger at a party, all can be described with that one powerful word. It carries the weight of millennia, evoking that original image on the cliff, a creature whose true weapon was not a claw but a question. Her physical image has become one of the most recognizable in the world, though often in a borrowed form. Most people today, when they hear the word Sphinx, immediately picture the Great Sphinx of Giza, that colossal, weathered guardian gazing across the Egyptian desert. That monument is entirely different in origin and purpose, a symbol of royal power and solar worship. Yet the Greek myth has so powerfully fused with the image that the two have merged in popular culture. This blending shows the sheer staying power of the idea. Whether as the Egyptian guardian or the Greek executioner, the Sphinx endures as the ultimate emblem of a mystery that must be solved, a silent challenge carved in stone or painted on canvas, forever asking us to look closer, to think deeper, and to wonder what impossible question might be waiting for us just around the next bend in the road. The story of the Sphinx and Oedipus was never a standalone myth, but the devastating centerpiece of a much larger tapestry of sorrow known as the Theban cycle. This epic collection of stories chronicles the cursed lineage of Thebes from its very foundation to its ultimate ruin. It begins generations before Oedipus with the city's legendary founder, Cadmus, who slew a sacred dragon and sowed its teeth to create the first warriors, an act of violence that seemed to stain the city's soil with conflict forever. The curse continued through the generations, touching Oedipus's father Laius and his crime, which summoned the Sphinx as divine retribution. That monster's riddle, therefore, was not an isolated incident. It was the crucial catalyst, the event that placed Oedipus, the unwitting product of the curse, onto the throne and into the marriage that would produce the next doomed generation. The plague, the blinding, the exile, all of it flowed from solving that riddle, and it directly set the stage for the tragedies of Oedipus's children. His two sons, Eteocles and Polynices, were destined to tear the kingdom apart. They agreed to share power, ruling in alternating years, but when the first term ended, Eteocles refused to relinquish the throne. This betrayal led Polynices to raise a massive army from Argos, the legendary Seven, against Thebes, who marched to lay siege to their own city. The brothers met in single combat at the gates and killed each other, fulfilling a father's bitter curse and leaving Thebes leaderless once more. This civil war then sets in motion the final, heartbreaking chapter of the cycle, the story of Oedipus's daughter Antigone. With both brothers dead, their uncle Creon again seized power. He declared Eteocles a hero to be buried with honors, but branded Polynices a traitor, decreeing his body must rot outside the walls, unburied and unmourned, the ultimate dishonor in the ancient world. Antigone, driven by a deeper loyalty to divine law and family duty, defied Creon's edict and performed the forbidden burial rites for her brother. For this act of conscience, she was sentenced to be buried alive in a stone tomb, a fate that led to a cascade of suicides, including Creon's own son and wife, leaving the king utterly broken. Every one of these catastrophic events can be traced back along a chain of cause and effect to that single moment on the mountain road. The Sphinx's riddle was the linchpin. By solving it, Oedipus did not end the curse, he merely transferred its energy. He unlocked the gates of Thebes only to allow the full, hereditary tragedy to march inside and play out to its bitter conclusion. The monster was a narrative device of terrifying efficiency, a pivot point that turned the page from one horror to the next, ensuring the city's suffering would echo through the bloodlines for generations. Sophocles gave the story its immortal shape, but the myth refused to stay on the ancient stage. Its power lies in its terrifying adaptability, a framework so potent that every era finds a new way to ask its old, dreadful questions. The playwright Sophocles in 5th century Athens crafted the version that has haunted us for 2.5 millennia. His play, Oedipus Rex, is not a simple retelling of events. It is a masterclass in dramatic irony and psychological suspense. Sophocles begins the story not at the beginning, but in the middle, with Oedipus as a confident king confronting the plague. The audience already knows the truth, so every proud declaration, every vow to hunt the killer, lands with a crushing weight. We are not watching a mystery unfold. We are witnessing a man build his own prison with every word, and the tension becomes almost unbearable. This structure made the myth a perfect vessel for exploring the limits of human knowledge and the architecture of fate, themes that would resonate far beyond the Greek amphitheater. Centuries later, in the consulting rooms of Vienna, the myth found a startling new interpretation. Sigmund Freud saw in Oedipus not a victim of celestial whims, but a map of the universal human subconscious. His psychoanalytic theory proposed the Oedipus complex, the idea that all children experience subconscious sexual desires for the parent of the opposite sex and rivalry with the parent of the same sex. For Freud, the myth was not about a unique curse, but about the terrifying realization of these buried, primal wishes that exist in everyone. Oedipus acted out the ultimate taboo, and his self-blinding symbolized the punishment for that forbidden inner world. While modern psychology has debated and moved beyond Freud's specific theories, his use of the story cemented its place in the modern imagination as a template for exploring hidden drives and family dynamics. The 20th and 21st centuries have continued to reshape the tale for new anxieties. Filmmakers have been particularly drawn to its visceral power. Pier Paolo Pasolini's stark, brutal 1967 film, Oedipus Rex, strips the story of its Greek setting for a timeless, almost mythic landscape. He focuses on the raw, animalistic rage and the blinding search for identity, presenting Oedipus as a figure of primal, doomed energy. The story's structure has become a blueprint for countless thrillers and detective stories, where the investigator discovers he is the criminal he seeks. You can hear echoes of the Sphinx's riddle in the tense verbal duels of modern cinema, where a character's survival hinges on solving a puzzle that reveals a deeper truth about themselves. Contemporary novels and television series routinely borrow the framework of cursed knowledge and inescapable fate. A family secret unravels across generations. A brilliant detective is horrified to find a connection to the crime scene. A leader's attempt to save his community inadvertently destroys it. These are all Oedipal patterns wearing modern clothes. The myth persists because its core dilemma is eternally relevant. How well do we truly know our own origins? Can we ever escape the patterns set by our past? And what is the cost of seeking a truth that might shatter the world we have built? The Sphinx's question was about mankind, but every retelling, from Sophocles to Freud to a modern screenplay, is ultimately asking the same thing of the audience. Who are you, really, and what hidden story are you living without even knowing it? The monster is gone, the city saved, the hero crowned, and yet we are left with a profound and unsettling silence. This is not a story that ends with a celebration. It ends with a blind man stumbling into exile, a queen hanging from a rope, and a kingdom that traded one terror for a legacy of blood. The journey from the Sphinx's terrifying perch to the ashes of Oedipus's house is one of the most complete and devastating arcs in all of storytelling. We witnessed a brilliant victory that was, in truth, a catastrophic defeat. Oedipus solved the external riddle with stunning clarity, defining the very essence of humanity, yet he remained utterly blind to the internal riddle of his own life. His intellect was his greatest asset and his ultimate downfall, a tool that could dissect a philosophical puzzle but could not penetrate the truth of his own origin. This is the core, chilling irony that gives the myth its timeless power, the idea that we can know so much about the world and so little about ourselves. The Sphinx was a test of self-knowledge disguised as a test of cleverness, and Oedipus passed only the second half. His story forces us to confront the terrifying mechanics of a world where fate and free will are locked in a deadly dance. Every step he took to avoid his destiny, every choice made in pride and confidence became the precise path to fulfilling it. The prophecy set the destination, but Oedipus's own character, his temper, and his hubris chose the route. It asks us whether we are ever truly the authors of our own stories, or if we are merely reading from a script whose final pages are hidden from us. And so we arrive at the haunting, final question this myth leaves echoing in its wake. Oedipus faced a literal monster with a literal riddle. Our monsters and our riddles are rarely so clearly defined. They are the choices we make based on half-truths, the stories we tell ourselves about our past, the confident paths we walk without ever questioning the map. What are the riddles in your own life that you think you have solved, but perhaps have not truly understood? What truths about your own story might be waiting in the shadows, not on a mountain road, but in the quiet corners of your own history? The tale of the Theban Sphinx and the Riddle-Solvers' fate is more than an ancient tragedy. It is a mirror, one that reflects the perpetual human struggle to see ourselves clearly. If you found this journey through the layers of myth compelling, let us know in the comments what other legendary stories you would like us to explore. Your curiosity guides our deep dives. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you do not miss our next exploration into the heart of mythology's greatest and most enduring